Unlike our competition, we actually put the double in Double Dragons. This is Sega Masters. Well, after experiencing the crown jewel of the Master System library in the last episode, we're back to arcade conversions as Sega is still holding firm to their coin-up mentality. But at least this time we get to look at one of the bigger names to hit Sega's console, and in timely fashion to boot. Today we have Double Dragon, a port of Technos' beat-em-up that made a huge splash in the arcades in 1987 and was making the rounds on all the gaming platforms during the following fall, with the Master System not being left out. The game centers around twin brothers and skilled martial artists Billy Lee and Jimmy Lee, who just witnessed their lady friend Marion being abducted by the Shadow Warriors, the tough gang that supposedly rules the city streets. Not too surprisingly, the brothers decide the best way to save their friend is by marching right into the Warriors' turf and inflicting some vigilante justice. Originally developed by Technos, Double Dragon first appeared in the arcades in 1987 and was distributed in the US by Taito. While it wasn't the first side-scrolling beat-em-up, it still became a massive hit thanks to its simultaneous two-player option that let a pair of buddies team up for some street fighting. And it all but created the belt-scrolling template used for the brawlers that followed, such as Capcom's Final Fight or Sega's Streets of Rage. With the game being so successful, home conversions were all but guaranteed, and it's no surprise Double Dragon was ported to just about every gaming platform imaginable at the time, from home computers to the dedicated consoles. Amazingly enough, both the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Master System received versions of Double Dragon within months of each other in 1988, and each one reflected the philosophies of the respective consoles at the time. Many of the arcade developers publishing cartridges for the NES were slowly realizing that home video games weren't meant to be short-term diversions designed to suck up a steady stream of quarters like their coin-up machines, especially in the era of Mario and Zelda. They deduced that gaming consumers spending $40 to $50 for cartridges might desire a more immersive and extended style of game and basically consoleize their arcade hits for the system, either adding home-exclusive features to their conversions to offer slightly more depth than their quarter-munching parents, or working them completely into new, expansive adventures. Double Dragon also went through something of a consoleization process on its way to the NES. While it was a solid adaptation in its own right with the brawling action mostly intact, gamers may have been quite surprised at the tweaks Technos made to the core gameplay. The two-player simultaneous option was missing, forcing Billy Lee to go at it solo, and the game made you unlock extra special moves through a light RPG-style method of earning experience points by defeating foes. It also changed up the levels from the arcade version with new areas and challenges heavy on platforming. While many popular titles became NES exclusives due to Nintendo's third-party policies at the time, Sega was able to obtain the license to produce their own version of Double Dragon, similar to how they were able to snag some of Capcom's arcade hits for the Genesis console the following year. Sega ventured to make their port completely faithful to the arcade version, including the two-player simultaneous capability that was absent from its NES counterpart, which they would use as the cart's main selling point. Every television commercial and print ad boasted how two players could play Sega's port of Double Dragon together, and thus had the edge over their chief competitor, at least in their opinion. On the surface, this Master System version does seem like a mostly decent conversion job by Sega that closely follows the arcade original. Each of the game's 4 missions finds the Lee brothers having to martial arts their way through a gauntlet of thugs to reach the end, although you don't have to worry about the timer that's found in other Double Dragon ports. Like other belt scrollers, you just walk along the path before stopping at certain locations to bust up all the baddies in the vicinity until the mysterious disembodied hand gives you the go-ahead to proceed further down the corridor. Billy and Jimmy have their fists and feet to dispose of the thugs with, and unlike the NES cart, there's no need to earn your moves here. Your full arsenal is at your disposal right from the start. Along the way, several types of weapons can also be picked up and used, including bats, whips, knives, and others, though they only last when the current attacking group is on the screen, after which they vanish. The whole arcade cast is present, from lesser foes like Williams, Roper, and the whip-wielding Linda, to the iconic brute Abobo and his different colored cousins. The characters all sport some decent details and animation, but mostly follow the NES version's slightly deformed sprites instead of resembling the coin-op characters. While the NES cart limited you to facing just 2 of the same enemy type on the screen, here you and your partner can brawl with up to 3 foes at once. Unfortunately, as you can see here, massive amounts of flicker pops up when too many guys bunch together, especially in the 2-player mode, which can get on your nerves. The vibrantly colored stages do somewhat resemble the arcade version, but the backgrounds are quite bland and a few settings are missing their interactive elements, such as the ladders you could climb. This second stage in particular feels rather stripped down compared to the coin-op original, since the pit you could fall into and the conveyor belt at the end have been omitted for whatever reason. And plenty of flaws pop up as you traverse this cart, including a somewhat confounding difficulty system. Gameplay-wise, Sega's port tries to mimic the arcade original a little too closely, which actually ends up working against it. On one hand, this conversion emulates the original version's brutal quarter-munching difficulty level, which isn't exactly console-friendly. Even with a buddy by your side, all your aggressors require way too many hits to take out, and they seem to barely react to your blows while always managing to counter-attack, even as you're pounding them. Plus, they quickly recover from being knocked down, rendering certain moves impossible to use since the baddies don't stay prone long enough for you to grab them for throws. It doesn't help that the brawling is plagued by some rather iffy hit detection, as it looks like you're hitting your foe but the game doesn't seem to register it, leaving you vulnerable while your opponent seemingly has no trouble getting in his shots. As a result, battles can seemingly drag on for longer than they should, and you can often end up losing quite a few lives trying to finish just one thug off. As far as the background music goes, the Western releases do a solid job mimicking the coin-op's familiar tunes, though they sound a little beepy in spots and fall short compared to the FM-enhanced soundtrack of the original Japanese Mark III version. The sound effects are rather nondescript, but when you or your foe perishes, he lets out this weird squealing sound that gets slightly annoying. While the actual fighting is frustrating enough, Sega's misguided attempt to balance it out is somehow even worse. When you're playing the arcade machine and your last life expires, you could always drop another quarter into the coin slot to continue your session. For whatever reason, Sega decided to bring that idea to their console version by granting you unlimited continues through the first 3 stages. Once your lives are exhausted, you just push the button and you restart right at the point where you perished at with a fresh allotment of lives, just as if you threw in another quarter. With all the cheap fighting you're forced to endure, this feels like your only chance to make any sort of progress. Yet in attempting to solve one problem, Sega created an even bigger issue. You're essentially given unlimited lives, which basically lets you plow through this cart without much effort, negating any challenge it offers. The only real penalty is your score being reset, which is irrelevant since this port lacks a leaderboard for you to enter your initials. Even if you somehow ignore these issues, Sega's port does what most every other straight-up Double Dragon port does, offering beat-em-up action at its most basic form, which has not held up very well over the years, and doesn't make for a lasting console experience. You have just 4 relatively short stages of walking forward and taking out the creeps with your rather small assortment of moves, with almost no platforming required, other than crossing the broken bridge in the 3rd level. And it's not like the Shadow Warriors have a real deep roster, as you mostly face the same 3 types of enemies over and over, just with different skin tones and an occasional appearance by a Bobo thrown in, as well as only 2 other end bosses, Jeff and Willie. This might have been sufficient back in 1988, but using the same moves to dispose of the same foes over and over does get a little repetitive after a short time, and will most likely feel rather archaic to those used to the more refined brawlers that have come along since, including the ones made specifically for the home market. The NES version of Double Dragon may get criticized for changing up the gameplay from the original, but it doesn't aim to be a direct port. Its mission was to make the arcade game feel more at home on a console by putting a bit more meat on the bones, so to speak, with its extra areas and the experience system that added some substance to the straightforward punching and kicking. It even tries to make up for the missing 2-player action by including a bonus head-to-head fighting mode where a pair of gamers could duke it out. It's not Street Fighter 2 and it's limited to a character versus its mirror image, but it's still a nice console exclusive feature to give the card a bit more value for the consumer's buck. The Master System, on the other hand, lacks any sort of home exclusive bonuses or features to keep you playing once you've seen the ending, which is not that hard to accomplish thanks to the over-generous continue system. When you reach the last stage, your credits are seemingly cut off, meaning once you lose your remaining lives, the game ends. But then again, the programmers decided to throw in a hidden cheat maneuver to re-enable them, which means you don't have to worry about the annoying obstacles and traps, which did make it over from the arcade version, keeping you from reaching the end and knocking Big Boss Willie off in the final showdown with little trouble. Incidentally, if two players manage to defeat Willie, the Lee brothers then fight each other to see which of them gets Marion's hand, just as in the arcade version. So ultimately, Sega's Double Dragon will go down as another missed opportunity for their 8-bit console, as a straight up port of an arcade game that didn't have any depth to begin with wasn't going to stack up well against the expansive offerings found on Nintendo's console at the time. And it's even hard to recommend even today. Sega could have added their own console exclusive bonuses to their conversion, but once again seemed content with just doing the bare minimum, hoping the name and the 2-player mode alone would sell their version. Whatever good points this card had is quickly swallowed up by some shoddy programming and repetitive action, and its unchecked allotment of credits basically means you can literally see everything this card offers in just one 15-minute playthrough. There are just better ways for Double Dragon disciples to indulge in their nostalgia, and better beat-em-ups can be found on the 8-bit consoles, the Master System included. Any way you slice it, this is one dragon that lacks any real fire.